The sun was already dropping behind the low hills when the cowboy finished mending the fence. He worked slow, not from age but from habit, testing each post, tightening each wire as if the land itself depended on his patience. Wind moved through the grass in long whispers, carrying dust and the distant call of cattle settling for the night. Out here, silence was never empty. It watched. It remembered. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stood for a moment, surveying the stretch of open land that belonged to no one but him. The ranch sat miles from the nearest town, chosen deliberately for its distance. Roads passed far enough away that engines rarely broke the quiet. People passed even less. That was the point. He turned back toward the house, a squat weathered structure crouched against the plain when he saw movement near the far fence line. Not a deer, not cattle, something smaller, unsteady. His hand stilled at his side, instinct sharpening without hurry. He waited, eyes narrowing, until the shape resolved into a person. A woman. She leaned against the fence as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her hair hung loose and tangled, clothes coated in dust, boots worn thin. She looked like someone who had been walking for far too long with nowhere left to go. When she tried to step forward, her knees buckled. He crossed the field without running. Years ago he might have reached for a weapon, might have called out, might have demanded answers before offering help. Now he moved with the calm certainty of someone who had learned what fear cost and what kindness could save. He reached her just as she slipped down into the grass. "Easy," he said, voice low, unused but steady. Her eyes fluttered open, sharp despite the exhaustion etched into her face. She tried to pull away, fingers clawing at the dirt, pride fighting weakness. He crouched, careful not to loom, and offered his canteen. She hesitated only a second before drinking, hands shaking as water spilled down her chin. He asked no questions. Not her name, not where she came from, not why she was alone at the edge of his land. He waited until the color crept back into her cheeks and her breathing slowed. Only then did he help her stand, supporting her weight as if it were nothing. The walk to the house was slow. She leaned on him but never fully relaxed, eyes darting to the horizon as though expecting something to rise out of it. When they reached the porch, she stopped, uncertainty tightening her grip on his sleeve. "You can stay," he said simply, "at least tonight." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and old wood. He set her down at the table, poured water into a chipped mug, and laid out food without ceremony. She ate carefully, like someone unused to being offered anything without a price attached. When she finished, she folded her hands in her lap and waited. He showed her the spare room, nothing fancy, just a clean bed and a folded blanket. She stood in the doorway, shoulders drawn tight, as if the small space might trap her. "I won't lock the door," he said. "Do what you need." Her eyes flicked up, surprised, and for a moment something like relief softened her guarded expression. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. Night settled in layers. Coyotes called from far off, the sound familiar and distant. He sat at the kitchen table long after the lamp was turned low, listening to the house breathe. From the spare room came no sound at all. He should have asked questions. Any sensible man would have. But questions led to answers, and answers led backward, to places he had buried with care. He had built this life one quiet day at a time, setting each boundary as carefully as that fence. Letting her stay felt like loosening a wire he had sworn never to touch again. He stepped onto the porch, staring out at the darkened land. Somewhere beyond the hills, roads carried people who were always searching for something. He had stopped running years ago by choosing not to be found. Bringing her in changed that, whether he admitted it or not. Behind him, the floor creaked softly. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket, eyes wary but clearer now. "I'll leave in the morning," she said. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's your choice." She hesitated, as if waiting for him to say more, then returned to the room. He stayed outside until the stars burned bright overhead. When he finally lay down, sleep came lightly. Near dawn, he dreamed of fences breaking and names he had not spoken in years. When he woke, the house was still, the air heavy with the sense that something had crossed into his life and refused to leave quietly. He rose before the sun, habits older than regret pulling him from the bed. Coffee brewed, boots went on, and he stepped outside to meet the pale edge of morning. Frost clung to the grass, silvering the land, making everything look briefly untouched. He told himself she was only a traveler passing through, that by evening the ranch would return to its careful solitude. Yet as he listened for movement inside the house, he realized the quiet felt different now, stretched thin, as if waiting. Whatever she carried had already crossed his fence, and fences, once crossed, were never quite the same again. He did not know her story, and he did not ask, but something in her eyes told him this meeting was not chance. The land had a way of bringing unfinished things together. By choosing mercy without questions, he had reopened a chapter he believed closed forever, and the day had not even begun under the widening western sky. Morning settled into the ranch with a quiet persistence, light spilling across the plains as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. The woman was already awake when he returned from checking the stock. She stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing the mug he had left behind. She looked smaller in daylight but no less guarded. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. She set the mug upside down and stepped back, giving him space. "I will anyway." She did not leave that morning, nor the next. Days folded into one another with an ease that surprised him. She helped without being asked, learned the rhythm of the place quickly, and spoke only when necessary. They worked side by side, words sparse but comfortable. Silence, he discovered, could be shared without pressure. He noticed the small things, the way she paused whenever a distant engine echoed across the land, how her eyes tracked the horizon even while her hands stayed busy. She slept lightly, waking before dawn as if trained to do so. Whatever she had fled had taught her vigilance. In return, she noticed him, his routines, the careful way he avoided certain drawers, certain corners of the house. The scar that ran along his forearm, white and old, which he never explained, she never asked. That restraint built a fragile trust between them, something unspoken yet understood. One afternoon, while mending tack in the barn, she picked up a leather strap and smiled faintly. "You keep everything," she said. "Only what works," he replied. She nodded as though that answer carried meaning beyond the obvious. The outside world pressed closer than either wanted to admit. A pickup truck slowed near the road one evening, dust rising in a long plume. He watched from the porch until it disappeared again. The woman stood behind him, tension radiating from her posture. "They're looking," she said. "For you?" he asked. "For answers," she said, which was not the same thing. That night he found himself staring at an old photograph tucked behind loose boards beneath the bed. He had meant to throw it away years ago. The face staring back at him belonged to a man who had shared his blood and broken his life in equal measure. He slid the photo back into hiding, jaw clenched, as if the wood itself might betray him. Storm clouds gathered the following day, low and heavy. Thunder rolled in the distance as they finished bringing the horses in. The air felt charged, every sound sharper. She moved closer to him without realizing it, fingers brushing his sleeve. He did not pull away. Rain hammered the roof that night, drumming like restless thoughts. He woke to a sound that did not belong to the storm. Her voice, low and fractured, drifting from the spare room. At first he thought she was praying. Then he heard the name. It slipped from her lips like a confession torn loose by sleep. A single word weighted with history. The same name he had buried beneath years of hard labor and harder silence. The name of the man who had taught him how to fight and how to lose everything. He froze, heart thundering louder than the rain. She whispered it again, softer this time, as if begging it not to hear her. He stepped back from the door, breath shallow, every instinct screaming danger. That name did not belong here. It did not belong to this life he had built from distance and dust. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the land scrubbed raw. She looked pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She avoided his gaze as if she sensed the shift even without remembering the dream. They worked in strained quiet. Each step felt measured, every glance loaded. He replayed the sound of her voice again and again, the way she had spoken that name as though it were both weapon and wound. There were only two ways she could know it, and neither ended well. By afternoon, the truth pressed too hard to ignore. He watched her at the fence line, hands resting on the wire he had repaired days earlier. The same wire she had crossed when she entered his life. Fences were meant to divide, but they also marked responsibility. What crossed them mattered. She turned, meeting his eyes at last. Fear flickered there, but also something steadier. Resolve, perhaps, or acceptance. "I didn't mean for you to hear," she said. He nodded once. "I didn't mean for you to say it." They stood facing each other, the distance between them charged with everything unsaid. The past had found him despite his careful defenses. He had offered shelter without questions, and in doing so, he had invited the one answer he never wanted to hear. The wind rose again, bending the grass toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond it, the world waited, impatient and unforgiving. He understood now that her arrival had not been chance, and that silence could no longer protect either of them. Whatever that name meant, it had bound their fates together the moment she crossed his fence. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of a choice approaching, heavy and unavoidable like a storm returning under an open western sky. He did not confront her immediately. The truth sat between them all night, heavy as the dark beyond the windows. By morning, he knew avoidance would only sharpen its edges. After breakfast, he motioned toward the porch and waited until the door closed behind them. "You said a name," he began, voice even but stripped bare. "One you shouldn't know." She rested her hands on the railing, knuckles white. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask." "That doesn't make it go away." "No," she agreed quietly. She told him then. Not all at once, but carefully, choosing each word as if it could detonate if mishandled. She had met the man years earlier, back when she still believed running meant freedom. He had promised protection money, a future unmarked by fear. What he delivered instead was control wrapped in charm, danger disguised as loyalty. She had stayed longer than she should have, long enough to learn his real business, long enough to hear the name spoken with respect and threat alike. When she discovered what he truly was, she ran. Again. Only this time she carried something others wanted silenced. The cowboy listened without interruption. With every detail, pieces of his former life shifted into place, forming a picture he had hoped would never be completed. The man she described was his brother, bound to him by blood and by choices neither of them could undo. He had walked away when the violence grew too close, when loyalty demanded a price he refused to pay. He believed his departure had severed all ties. It hadn't. "You knew who I was," he said finally. She shook her head. "Not at first. I found out later. When I realized where I was headed, I almost turned back." "But you didn't." "No." Her gaze met his, steady now. "Because you were the only place left that name didn't have power." That admission landed deeper than any accusation. He had built his isolation to escape the shadow of his brother's reputation. In doing so, he had unknowingly become a refuge for those broken by it. The sound of an engine cut across the land, distant but unmistakable. They both turned toward the road. A vehicle slowed, then another behind it. This time the dust did not drift past, it settled. "They've found me," she said. "They've found us," he corrected. There was no panic in him, only resolve. He had spent years avoiding confrontation, mistaking distance for peace. But the past did not stay buried simply because one refused to speak its name. He told her to pack only what she needed. Then he walked to the back room and opened the drawer he had kept locked since the day he arrived. Inside lay the tools of a life he had abandoned. He strapped on what remained useful and left the rest behind. When the men approached, he stepped off the porch alone. They recognized him instantly. Surprise flickered across their faces, followed by something like relief. He let them talk, let them threaten, let them invoke his brother's authority as if it still mattered. "It doesn't end the way you think," he said calmly. They believed they had come for her. They had not considered that he might choose differently this time. When he stood his ground, refusing to surrender what was no longer theirs to claim, hesitation crept in. That pause cost them leverage. They left with promises instead of victory, engines roaring back toward the road they came from. The land exhaled when the dust settled. They stood together in the quiet aftermath, neither pretending the danger was over. Some debts were not so easily dismissed. But something had shifted. He no longer felt hunted by a name spoken in fear. He had faced it, owned it, and refused to let it dictate the future. "You don't owe me anything," he told her. She shook her head. "I know, that's why it matters." Days later, she chose to leave, not because she was chased, but because she finally could. He helped her prepare, fixing the fence one last time where she had crossed into his life. The wire held firm beneath his hands. At dawn, she stood at the edge of the property, sunlight painting the plains gold. "If they come back," she said, "I won't bring trouble to your door again." He nodded. Doors exist to be opened, not feared. She smiled, the weight gone from her eyes, and walked toward the road with purpose instead of desperation. He returned to his work as the day unfolded, the ranch unchanged yet different all the same. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled him. The fence stood straight. The land stretched wide and open. For the first time in years, he felt rooted rather than hidden, ready to face whatever crossed his boundaries next, without running, without silence, and without fear of names that no longer owned him.